Today I decided I'm going to do a little bit different of a video than I usually do. Today I wanted to discuss white people very objectively. The crimes that white people have committed on humanity through the past 200 or so years. But stick around for the whole video so you get the point. I can talk about what most people talk about, how the white man colonized Africa. We'll get to that. What I wanted to start off with was China and the Opium Wars. A lot of you guys don't know what the Opium Wars are because they don't really talk about that in mainstream media. But I'm going to talk about that. See, back in the late 1800s, the Chinese dynasty was starting to fall behind technically. They were the most superior nation state at that time, or we might as well flat out say it, the Chinese were the most advanced civilization through the 1700s, early 1700s, and then came the industrial age and China fell behind. But during that shift where China was treating the British and the Dutch, as they used to call them, barbarians, well, those barbarians, they started having better ships, better technology, and what happened was soon those barbarians started dictating the terms to the Chinese royal family. So let me break this down in Cliff Notes version. The white man wanted the silks from China. They wanted to trade with China. But honestly, the British and the East India Trading Company didn't really have anything the Chinese wanted. So the evil motherfuckers decided, well, we need to keep this economy going, so let's give them heroin. That's what happened. The white man started spreading heroin to the Chinese people. So the Chinese people would demand heroin and have a trade. That's really what happened. And then when the Chinese government said, enough is enough, you're not going to poison my people anymore, and they went to war, well, because the white man had better technology, the Chinese lost that war. And they had to settle on different terms. And the terms were this: the opium kept coming. Not only that, there were special sections in China just for foreigners. And foreigners could do whatever they want. They didn't even have to obey Chinese law. So what happened is they started spreading more and more heroin. And the Chinese population got very sick. And the royal family went to war again. And they lost again. And this time, the British, and the Dutch took Hong Kong from them. Yes, modern day Hong Kong. That is how the British got it. Through peddling drugs. Now, I want to make this very clear. America was a very, very minor player at this point in history and had very little to do with this. Yet, now the Chinese have started a war with us. Now the Chinese are sending us fentanyl and killing our kids. Why? For payback. They're doing this for payback. Are they justified in their payback? That's something else you can argue for another day. We're not here to argue if they're justified or not. Someone can argue that Hong Kong is better off today because of British involvement. You can argue that point. Or we can go to Africa, where the white man enslaved Africans in the slave trade. Yet it wasn't just the white man doing it, now was it? See, what actually happened was the white man cut deals with the strongest tribes in Africa, who would go to war and enslave other tribes and then trade them for goods. So yes, black people had a lot to do with the slave trade too. Arabs did too, of course, and so did our good Zionist friends who owned all the ships, but that's a story for another day. Some could argue that South Africa is one of the crown jewels of the continent because the white man built all that stuff there. Does that excuse him from all the rapes and murders he did? That's something for you to decide. I'm just giving you the facts. When the white man came here to America, he slaughtered the Indians. He completely slaughtered the Indians. The most sickest thing I think he did was he gave blankets with smallpox to the Indians to infect them with the disease, not just the men who were fighting wars, but their kids and their women. That is utterly disgusting. So from the slave trade to the opium wars to the massacre of the Indians, that's a lot of blood on the white man's hands. Yet, no white person alive today had anything to do with that. No black man alive today has ever been property. Unless you want to talk about the Federal Reserve, and I guess they own everyone's ass. You know, if you want to go further back in history, we can talk about the Moors, a black Muslim tribe that went in Spain and modern day France and enslaved all the white people for 700 years. Are all the black people responsible for that who are alive today? Of course not. The fact of the matter is this: every fucking slave, every race has enslaved every other race in this planet's history. Every single one. Every single one. So you can no more blame a white person today for what the slavers did 1860s, 1700s than you can blame a black man for what the Moors did. What do you think? The Chinese are innocent? You know, Mongolia used to be full of white people. Not anymore. Because the Chinese went in there, killed all the men, raped all the women, and bam, a new race came. Mongolians, half white, half Asian. So are we today to hold Mongolians responsible for what history made them? Of course not. Of course not. And what you have to understand is as long as everyone is fighting amongst themselves, the real oppressor is having a ball. Because every race in history has been on top. Arabs with the Ottoman Empire, Persians had their empire, blacks had their empire, the Moors, read up on them. Chinese definitely had their stamp on history many times. So the white man has been on top for the past 200 years. That's quickly changing. But I'd also like to talk about the contributions of the white man. You like voting? You like having rights? That's something that white people died for throughout history for the past 200 years. You like civil liberties? That's something white people died for, an ideal they died for. Do you like TVs? What about cars? What about planes? What about the iPhone you're using right now through the internet? All the white man's inventions that every single race has benefited from. We need to start looking at things into context. Every race has benefited, every race has done wrong. But you cannot look at what happened 200, 300, 400, 500 years ago and be like, the people alive today are responsible for that. That's garbage. Society is very, very different now, as will be very different 100 years from now. People need to understand their history. Before I was a numerologist or astrologer, I was a historian. I could probably teach history at any university in the country. Lastly, I'm not a big fan of this system of government. I think this court system is a joke, and I think the justice system is a joke. Yet at the same time, I have to recognize that this is the most fair, just system that's ever existed in human history. And I also have to understand that change is generational. It doesn't happen overnight. And lastly, I want you to know that change isn't always a good thing either. In the not too distant future, people are going to tell you that you need to trade your freedom for security. In some ways, it's justified. In other ways, it's going to lead to hell on earth. And there is only one answer. almost every single issue we have, and that is knowledge. Because 100 years from now, they're not going to be talking about black, white any more than most people are talking about Protestant versus Catholic now. What they will be talking about is what's your sign? What's your life path? And unfortunately, I'm not going to be around to witness that in all its glory. Yet, I'll rest very easy knowing I had a big part to do with the future.